I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Pod Casty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader, explore how they speak to their moment in this one. The show's hosted by, I would say today, 1.5 guys. I'm half guy. My name is Jake Serwin. I'm not making any declaration about my gender.
No.
I just mean I'm half of a person right now. I'm feeling halved.
That's the power of medication. I mean, if we are just a bundle of nerves and brain chemicals, if you mess up those brain chemicals, maybe you're only half you.
If. Spotlight on the word if.
Uh-huh.
What's your name, man? Are you on the show or what? What's going on?
Yeah, man. I am Ian Ryan. I am also on the show. And I think it's fine. You said directing. I don't know if we're going to leave that in or whatever you said.
I think I'm going to leave directing in. I think that was kind of funny.
Cool.
You know, English is full of, it's just a kind of a goblin's hoard of looted grammatical structures.
That's true.
I learned about this. I've been watching these videos of, there's a dialect guy. He's like a linguist. He's like, here's some dialects of English that you maybe don't know about because they're small.
Sure.
And also talking about other stuff. And I learned a lot of the times when there is a peculiar grammatical peculiarity to a particular region.
Yep.
Often it's actually grammar from an indigenous language to that region that has been brought forward into English. For example, you know how Irish people sometimes they say, "Oh, he's after a pint," like he wants to go have a beer. Apparently, in the Irish language, and by the way, before I say this, podcastingforme@gmail.com if I'm wrong. Apparently, in the Irish language, you would say the equivalent of like he's after a pint or whatever. Like someone going to get or someone who wants something is after it. It's the same word.
So in that famous children's cereal commercial, they're in fact honoring the beautiful roots of the Irish language.
Oh, fuck. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. If anyone is listening to this from Ireland, do they have Lucky Charms there? We're recording this the day after St. Patrick's Day.
It'd be cool if they were called like American Guns and it was just like a big
Yeah. Knowing those guys over there, though, they're probably called friggin' Blarney Stones.
Knowing those guys?
Yeah.
Come on.
Knowing some of those guys. I'm supposedly... My mother, who is a famous fabulist, told us when we were children that we were related to the man who brought St. Patrick's Day to the United States.
Cool.
So if that's the case, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry to the river in Chicago.
It gets tortured every year.
The Chicago River? What river is that?
That's, of course, the Lake Michigan outlet, they call it.
Is it really?
Nope. Do you know the name of the guy who made Blarney Castle?
It's called the Chicago River.
Yeah, it is.
So I was right.
Yeah.
What's up?
Cormac McCarthy is the Blarney Castle guy. That's his name. For real.
Is that real?
Yep.
That's true?
Mm-hmm.
That's
true.
Really funny.
Yeah.
That's like something else. Disambiguation. You know the guy who invented the Hot Cheetos guy?
Yeah.
Did you see the Hot Cheetos movie?
No.
But you know the story of the guy?
No.
His real name, Barack Obama. I'm operating at 0.5% today. Sorry, everybody. For those who aren't Patreon subscribers, where I updated folks a little bit, we got some runny news. So I had a persistent headache. You may remember from our taxi driver episode. I went to the doctor. You went to the doctor, I was about to say. You probably did.
Yep.
And they told me that I had a sinus infection in the back of my head, in the back of my skull.
Yeah.
The sphenoid sinus. And they gave me a bunch of prednisone and antibiotics. And if you can believe it, taking a lot of prednisone has not resulted in great sleep or mental functioning for me.
Yeah, I can just buy that. Yeah.
So I am feeling very regular, and maybe we'll cut this out and we'll see. We'll A/B test it. We'll have half the listeners get a version of this episode where I don't explain this, and we'll see if they say anything.
Sure.
This is not possible.
May just be totally incapable of registering any difference, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. But also that's not possible with Libsyn, at least at the pay structure that we're engaged with. How are your health doing?
How are my health? You know what? For the fourth time, I've convinced myself that I'm on the mend. So I
mean, you sound unwell still.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the most recent bout of infection is over. The things that the antibiotics I think we're getting after, I think we're successfully dealt with. But the underlying
you
problem,
got some of those Irish antibiotics.
I do, yeah, you're right.
Amoxicillin. Did you know an Irish guy invented the chaise lounge?
No.
Yeah, his name was Paddy O'Furniture. That's not my joke. That's someone else's joke.
It's a good one, man. Your memory for
pretty good.
Mediocre street jokes is incredible.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that.
And here I was worried we wouldn't have enough to talk about for Rolling Thunder.
Don't give it away. Hey,
erase.
As I mentioned, we have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Pod Casty For Me. If what's been going on here for the past couple of minutes has inspired you to send us money, you can go to Patreon and give us $5 a month. We'll give you 2 big old episodes about Clint Eastwood movies, about movies adjacent to Clint Eastwood, all kinds of stuff. We recently covered 2 films by Quentin Tarantino, who is,
we sure did,
for some reason, an avowed fan of this film we're talking about today. Really trying to make sure everybody knows how much he likes Rolling Thunder.
Yep.
So if you're interested in that, go on over there, patreon.com/Pod Casty For Me. We also got Baby's First Dirty Harry, we interview my 22-year-old coworker about what he thought about Dirty Harry and some other stuff. So check us out, patreon.com/Pod Casty For Me. We need money for antibiotics
money. Yep. That's all it's going to. Yeah. I mean, truly.
Oh, boy. We're not doing good, huh?
Yeah, it's fine. I actually think it's quite a beautiful document of our decline. And then when one or both of us pass away, it'll be like a little tribute.
Hey, on the side of, I was looking at Jane Fonda's blog.
Okay.
In anticipation of this website. And on the side.
Did you say in anticipation of this website?
I sure did, and I'm leaving it in. Fuck, dude.
Man, I gotta tell you, I am constantly anticipating websites. That is true of me, and I think true of you as well.
I mean, you'd just be smart too, for your own well-being.
Yep.
You gotta head on a swivel.
Sure.
All real men, as soon as they enter a Walmart, they check all the exits and count the number of websites. Yeah. Anyway, speaking of PTSD, I was checking. I was looking at Jane Fonda's website, and there was another blog post that said something about how there are no healthy people in a sick world, and so I saw Jane Fonda's website, and it saw also Into Me.
Yeah, truly, you got Magic Mountained.
I did. I went over there to Six Flags. This is basically how I feel after I get off a roller coaster, but it won't stop.
Yep.
Speaking of rolling coasters, today we're talking about Rolling Thunder, directed by John Flynn. But first, we got to do our 2 questions. We got to do our famous segment, and we're finally going to have a theme song, and I'm going to drop it in here. What a theme song that was. I'm going to, you know what? In a sort of Brechtian move, I'm actually going to drop it in here so that everybody knows that we were just pretending.
Okay.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, now people
you might be editing this.
Fully
I'm actually not
alienated.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is your episode, so you can do whatever you want.
Great.
This is the 2 questions. This is our famous signature segment where we talk about 2 questions that we have for each other to sort of spark conversation and get it going.
Yeah.
And today I have one that I'd like to start with, and that is, Ian, what is your favorite song from Bob Dylan's 1976 live album Hard Rain, recorded on the second leg of the Rolling Thunder Review Tour?
Gotta be Man and Me.
He didn't do it. It hadn't come out yet.
Shit. Gotta be that one that Llewyn Davis plays at the beginning of the movie.
Now, all right, I'm going to tell you, there's 2 correct answers. So there's 2 arguably correct answers to this. I would say the 2, because most of what makes Hard Rain interesting for me, and Robert Christgau didn't like it, some other guys didn't like it, they thought everyone sounded tired on the album, and imagine just being, I don't know, imagine feeling like that was worth your time to say.
Yep.
But anyway, it's a lot of rejiggered, rearranged, electrified or sped up or
Gotcha.
Full band arrangemented versions of some older Dylan songs.
I see. They got girl talk in there.
Exactly, but instead of the way that he does them now, where he sounds like a car with a muffler taken off of it, and you can't tell what song it is until the end when someone next to you tells you. You can tell what song's there. Okay, cool. Anyway, there's two possible correct answers, and those are Lay Lady Lay and Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues Again. I think right now, at this point in my life, I think I would say that my favorite from Hard Rain is Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues Again. Thank you. So that's my favorite. Thank you for answering my two questions.
You're so welcome. Should I hit you with a 2 question? Is this my time?
Hit me, baby.
I don't know if you recall this. Do you remember that you were the person who taught me about what shibari is?
Nope, but that sounds right.
Yeah,
shibari, of course, Japanese erotic rope torture. I guess not torture. Japanese erotic rope tying. I mean, it's torture adjacent.
And I don't know. It doesn't have to be erotic, right? That's my understanding.
Is that true?
I believe you can have.
Well, it's artful also. Right. I mean, it's sort of part of the. I think the art is in the tires technique.
Yes,
you can do sort of elaborate lattice work.
Exactly.
Making a sexual partner, or it turns out maybe just an artistic partner, look like they got stuck in one of those pirate nets you used to climb up to the play place,
but gracefully. Yeah, I think the idea is to be bound in a position of great vulnerability, but it's not painful, I think, at least in theory. I've not engaged with it. I think it could be interesting. I'm just not familiar with it myself.
But I was the first person to tell you about it?
You sure were, yeah.
That's funny.
And I like this idea of very smooth ropes. Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, you like to bring this up. I like to bring it up, too. My grandfather was a rope salesman. Interesting thing about me.
That up. Yeah, and in this case, you were also a bit of a rope salesman. It's in the blood.
I don't charge. Couldn't possibly. No, I never met the man. Sure. Grandfather drank himself to death. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. But I do just love the idea of. I love to think about someone who knew so much about rope types,
absolutely,
widths, number. I mean, even like technical terms, I can't pull out at this time. But the number of strands woven together, I assume there's a particular industry term for this. And so I have not engaged in shibari in either capacity as tire or tied. But we'll say this.
We got a Patreon.
Congratulations to everybody doing that over there or over here. Everybody messing around with rope stuff in a way that everybody's having a good time and happy to be there.
Yep.
Keep up the good work and have an earthquake and fire plan. Just have a plan.
Damn, that's true. Had not occurred to me. Very sound advice.
I think I would imagine that like basically rule number 1 of doing stuff with ropes is
pee first.
Knife close at hand. Just, you need a way to get out of there. No velvety imported Japanese rope is worth a human life.
That's so
and sometimes
true.
Sometimes you got to slice that sucker.
Yep.
Or I guess you got to drag a hog-tied nude woman down the stairs with you.
But respectfully for safety.
Smoke fills the building. Yeah. Great. That is, so the question was, do I remember that I told you that? The answer is no, but I'm glad to have taught you about it.
Thank you.
Rolling Thunder, directed by John Flynn, released October the 14th, 1977. We discussed this a bit on our Obsession episode, which will have released at this point. But we are here confronting a new kind of question of authorship to the Schrader series. Because on the Clint series, sometimes a movie merely starred Clint Eastwood. And it's unclear how much of, we were able to read his authorship or his participation in the film or speculate as to how much of the film's artistic output or not artistic effect was derived from his work.
Particularly because of his reputation as a backseat director or a guy who climbs into the front seat and sits on the driver's lap.
Yes,
and
exactly. Or even in the case of getting me all excited now. I'm even more confused than before.
All right.
Even in the case of something like In the Line of Fire, where there's, big deal director involved, the film is so indebted to
his
the
reputation,
star text of Clint Eastwood, that it is he is one of the film's fathers, without question.
Yeah.
But here in Schraderland, we are confronted with a film that Paul Schrader basically is not involved with. He's he wrote a script that was heavily rewritten, or not even that heavily, but he's not involved with the production of this film. And I've read the entirety of his original script. You've read some of it. And it feels like this film was changed in all the most significant ways, and he has effectively disowned it, like with Obsession. And so, I wonder, where's the Schrader in all of this? We have an interesting task ahead of us, how to discuss this film.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are both, to some degree, auteur skeptics, but this is where it comes into play, right? Particularly why writers are not put forward. I should say only writers, obviously not writer-directors, but this idea that it's taken out of your hands so early in the process, and everything from casting to budget to location choices, whatever, all these things are beyond the scope of your contribution. And we anybody familiar with the filmmaking process knows these phrases like a movie is made in the editing suite or whatever, right? Where it's like farther and farther you get down the stream, you can still have an enormous impact, and the writers may be out of the process. Now, does that mean that this is not Schrader's film? I don't think I would go that far. I mean, dude wrote at least drafts of the script, right? But you're right that it's an interesting project to say, how do we say, like, this part is Schrader when it's been out of his hands for so long?
Right. In some ways, he's like the subject of the Shibari. He is if John Flynn here is, I guess you could say, the Shibari master.
Okay.
Or Bakushi.
Okay.
And Schrader's hands are indeed tied. He's unable to really affect the situation much beyond wriggling. And of course, the attractive sort of slight bulging of his flesh between the intricately
tight but not too tight ropes. And who is AIP in this scenario?
AIP is, I guess, the guy who's like giving directions to the Nawashi or Bakushi, depending on how you want to use it.
Now we've just lost everybody.
They're all gone. Anyway, Paul Schrader wrote Rolling Thunder and was intending to direct it. He intended it as his directorial debut for a bit, and we're taking a lot of this from the essential book, Schrader on Schrader.
Yep.
This is from an interview with the book's author, Kevin Jackson, the Forgotten. They call him the Sixth Jackson. Schrader says, this is from an interview in 1990. Around 1974 to 1975, I was so full of ideas, I was writing faster than I could make deals. The ideas were coming out of the toaster like Pop-Tarts. Now, first of all, I do want to just dig into this metaphor a little bit.
Sure, why not?
Because he doesn't say they're coming out like Pop-Tarts from a toaster. He says they're coming out of the toaster, like Pop-Tarts do.
Yes.
So I guess he'll just be going about his business around the house and hear a ding, run into the kitchen. There's an idea in there. Anyway, he says, I wrote Deja Vu, Rolling Thunder. Deja Vu became Obsession, by the way. Québécois, which is an unproduced screenplay, and others all in the same year. I look back on those days with great fondness. The ideas were so hot and heavy. He says it was going to be my first film as a director. That film has an ironic history. I originally sold it to Larry Gordon at AIP. That's Lawrence Gordon, producer on this film. And then Larry moved from AIP to Columbia and took it with him. And then he left Columbia and took it to 20th Century Fox. Made it there, and then 20th sold it back to AIP again, and they released it.
It's true.
So classic Hollywood. I mean, buddy, I don't think you meant to do this, but Shibari is like the defining metaphor of this episode, because we just got strands
All
looped
right, yeah.
about each other.
Yep.
Yeah. The story of Rolling Thunder was really botched in the rewriting. The main character in the film was meant to be the same sort of character as Travis with that same antisocial edge. The character, as I originally wrote him, was a Texas trash racist who had become a war hero without ever having fired a gun and came home to confront the Texas Mexican community. All his racism from his childhood in Vietnam comes out, and at the end of the film there's an indiscriminate slaughter of Mexicans meant as some kind of metaphor for American racism in Vietnam. In order to get it made at 20th, they insisted that the racist element be taken out, which is the equivalent of giving Travis Bickle a dog. Once you take out the perverse pathology of these characters, rather than become films about fascism, they become fascist films, and that's what happened to Rolling Thunder.
Oh, okay. All right. I mean, yeah, we could talk about what the actual film is. What does it look like now?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, what kind of dog do you think Travis Bickle has? And do you honestly, there's plenty of people who are violent sociopaths who have dogs.
Yeah, it doesn't save them.
These people are often like running, for example, dog fighting enterprises or participating in them, or maybe like breeding pit bulls.
But I do like the idea that if you had given him one of those like animatronic plushy things that you can get for people with dementia or things like this, you know, that sort of soothe them.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
Yeah. There's one of those in the White House right now, I understand.
Yeah.
William Devane as Charles Rain in this film he's giving JRB. He's giving Joseph Robinette Biden.
Interesting.
Big
Now,
time.
okay, let's...
With the Aviators, I think.
Oh, I see. Visibly. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, where to begin with the film? Let's talk about the players. Let's talk about some of these guys a little bit, and we'll get into the movie.
Yeah.
So we got John Flynn.
Mm-hmm. We do.
And a lot of you are saying, the guy from Tron? Flynn's Arcade?
Uh-huh.
And you know what I'm saying to you is, no, that character's name was Kevin Flynn, you idiot. Have you seen that clip of Jeff Bridges? Hold on. All right, I'm just going to find it because it's so good.
I do know which one you're talking about. Are you talking about from the
acting panel?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
really
okay, so
wonderful.
This is like a panel for like the Hollywood Reporter does these panels where they have a bunch of actors together to talk about something. And this is Kieran Culkin from Succession talking to Pedro Pascal from The Last of Us about how, I guess he's asking him about how he tried to play the game before he made the show or whatever. Can you hear this?
So you played it after you...
Did you hear that?
I can't hear it, but I also know basically every word of this exchange, so you could just...
Okay, well, I'm just play it for the listener. Yeah.
So you played it after you filmed it, or...
I tried to play it. I can't play it.
Okay.
What game is it?
It's called The Last of Us.
Is it out now?
Adapted it into,
a few years ago, yeah.
Because I got sucked into a video.
Which
game,
one?
You know, Tron.
Tron, of course.
Just...
I'm sorry for laughing before the punchline, but it's so...
One of the greatest jokes I've ever heard in my life.
Good. And they just walk... Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Well, I think because he can do like old man voice, so he sort of lulls them into...
They're surprised just to see a man of his advanced age saying that he got sick of a video game. Yeah.
This is what some of these Beltway brain morons think Biden is doing. They think Biden is doing Drunken Monkey style. I keep bringing up Drunken Monkey style. It came up the other day.
Great.
But they think he's doing like an elaborate game where he's pretending to obviously not know where he is in order to achieve
lure his opponents into
masterful statecraft.
Yes.
So John Flynn is a director of kind of
basically two films of note.
Yeah. Well, he directed a movie called The Outfit.
Yes.
Prior to this, which has a good cast. It's like Robert Duvall and Karen Black, Joe Don Baker, and Robert Ryan, Timothy Carey, Joanna Cassidy's in it. I mean, Elisha Cook Jr. Some it's one of these movies.
Yeah.
And have you seen this film?
I have not seen this film. I have seen one of the other films in the series upon which this is based, I believe. But
right, it's based on a Parker, the Donald Westlake character.
So they're right for making decent films if you're John Borman, but.
This is one of those movies where I'm working at the video store and I keep seeing The Outfit on the shelf somewhere. I don't know why. And I'm thinking, maybe I'm maybe I'm Tarantino too, Tarantino. Maybe I take this movie home and I'm going to find this is a gem. Maybe this is a forgotten gem of 1970s cinema. I take the movie home, I watch it. It's a movie. It just leaves no impression. It's like a Hitman double cross kind of thing. Everybody's doing decent work, but it just sort of melts from the consciousness.
Texted you Vincent Canby's review of this, which of course says
withering.
Yeah, just brutal. The outfit is not really a bad movie. It doesn't fail in an attempt to do something beyond its means. It doesn't attempt to do anything except pass the time, which simply isn't good enough when most of us have access to television. So this is just worse than just having the television on, is what he's saying.
Exactly. Yeah. He's comparing the film unfavorably to White Noise. So he makes that movie. Again, I didn't think it was bad. It was just not there.
Yeah.
It's just chaff.
Sure. Yeah.
And then he makes this movie. He makes Out for Justice, which of the limited number of Steven Seagal films I've seen is the best one. I think that movie works pretty well.
Okay,
But it's called Out for Justice. It's a revenge movie,
right?
Of, I think, fairly modest aims that it meets handily, but this is not the kind of guy I would pick to follow up Martin Scorsese in a Travis Bickle's cousin kind of story,
Although he doesn't even really take it in the direction that I mean, it's not clear entirely what direction he wants to take it in, even, I guess. But
right.
Yeah, so what happens to this film?
So the movie, as Schrader mentioned, he takes it to Lawrence Gordon, and who is... They were just talking about him on Blank Check, actually. I was listening to the Blank Check episode on Predator, which a great episode. It's got John Gabris on it. It's mostly just them telling crazy Arnold Schwarzenegger stories, and it's wonderful.
Remembering Carl Weathers fondly. Yeah.
Exactly. So Lawrence Gordon kind of is AIP in the 70s. And AIP, American International Pictures, or American International Productions, is like one of the premier junk... exploitation. Junk is rude. One of the premier exploitation production companies in the 1970s.
Yep.
You got Corman is cranking out movies there.
Almost enough said in terms of proving that this is the place.
So we've got things like Muscle Beach Party, Mario Bava's Black Sabbath. They also put out The Umbrellas of Cherbourg in the United States.
Yeah.
The Tomb of Leguia, like a lot of Roger Corman, Vincent Price type stuff. Sidney Lumet's The Pawnbroker, but also Beach Blanket Bingo, and Frankenstein Conquers the World, and What's Up Tiger Lily, and The Trip, and The Born Losers, which is the first Billy Jack movie, Wild in the Streets, which is another like biker movie, Spirits of the Dead, which we talked about on our Patreon episode on the witches. And then you've got like Boxcar Bertha, the Scorsese Roger Corman film that John Cassavetes told him never to make again. Blackula, 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, Walking Tall. You're getting it. Future World. I mean, a bunch of the Pam Grier movies. You get it. Tarantino stuff, Grindhouse stuff, exploitation films, unapologetic exploitation films. And they basically say, we'll make this movie, but just the part with the revenge plot. None of this nonsense about masculinity and, toxic masculinity, as we call it now, and psychopathy and violent men going to Vietnam and returning even more violently. We just want to make a movie that's got the revenge plot in it and a guy gets his hand cut off.
Yeah, they want Rambo 2, not Rambo 1.
Yeah, well, hold on. They want Rambo. They don't want First Blood. Yes.
I didn't want to confuse the issue. You're correct, though.
This is a Confusing the Issue podcast.
All right.
I think categorically.
But, I mean, it's interesting, and I think Schrader's point is extremely incisive to say that by softening the edges, or at least they believe themselves to be softening the edges, you are actually seeding fascism much deeper into the minds of the viewer than you would be by making it objectionable and upsetting to watch.
And on our Taxi Driver episode, we talked a bit about the concern that movie is endorsing or over aestheticizing fascism, even in its critique of Travis's mindset.
Right.
And here, you don't get any of the critique of the mindset.
This would just be if there was a heroic murder at the end of Sport and Buddies.
Exactly. So we'll talk a little bit about the differences between the script and the film, but just to run through some of these guys. So they bring on a guy named Heywood Gould.
They do.
To rewrite the script. Heywood Gould is a name that turns up on a number of movies with several writing credits. Seems like Heywood Gould is kind of a guy to bring in if you wanted some changes made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. But he also was a writer and director of several films, including, just to give you a little sense of the direction that the film took, the 1991 film One Good Cop.
He sure was. Yep.
Here's the IMDb logline: an NYPD detective, Michael Keaton, and his struggle for justice while taking care of his late partner's 3 little girls after he is killed in the line of duty.
Yep.
So, first of all, whoever wrote this logline, a little bit confusing because it kind of sounds like he's a ghost who is taking care of another dead guy's.
Like, yep.
Yeah. And then in 2001, he also wrote and directed the film Double Bang.
Oh, I didn't see this one.
Billy Baldwin and the unrelated Adam Baldwin.
Oof.
And that's another movie about, like, you know, a good cop drawn into a world of murder or whatever. But he did write the script for Roger Donaldson's 1988 film Cocktail, adapting his own novel.
Yeah.
And so it is time now to Oye, return to our segment, whereas now therefore be it resolved.
Oh, hell yeah.
We don't have a sound effect for this.
Nope.
Okay.
Okay.
Whereas Rain Man revolves entirely around a broad, stupid, insensitive performance by accused sex pest and generally irritating man Dustin Hoffman, and whereas its plot revolves around yuppie Tom Cruise learning to become very slightly more tolerant of his deeply neurodivergent brother in order to improve his own life and not his brother's, and whereas the massive success of Rain Man is in no small part a source of the goodwill that allowed director Barry Levinson's son Sam Levinson to convince HBO to let him adapt an Israeli teen soap opera, and whereas Cocktail is a movie about the style of flair bartending pioneered by TGI Fridays, treated like it's a skill everyone respects and cares about, a la bar bouncing in Roadhouse, and follows Tom Cruise from the competitive New York flair bartending scene to the tropical resort bars of Jamaica, where he just kind of hangs out and flirts with Elizabeth Shue, but also a major character slits his own throat with a broken liquor bottle.
Correct.
And it ends with Tom Cruise's character triumphantly announcing plans to franchise his bar concept. Now, therefore, be it resolved that if one of the 2 Tom Cruise films released in 1988 has to win Best Picture that year, it should have been Cocktail.
You have my complete support. 100% endorsement.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I was thinking about. The Cocktail, I mean, it's stupid, but it's so much better than Rain Man. Rain Man's awful.
Yeah,
Have you seen Rain Man?
I have, and that was exactly my experience. Unpleasant.
It's an evil film.
Yeah.
Have you seen Cocktail?
I have seen Cocktail, and my experience was pleasant, I would say.
Yeah, it's just kind of like a stupid good time.
Yep.
But Rain Man is a stupid bad time.
Yep.
So
that also thinks it's a smart good time. Even worse.
Yeah. So I'd say Cocktail should take home the hardware.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, if we're talking 1988, there's, you know, we got a lot of others. So we got, like, My Neighbor Totoro.
Sure,
and, like,
yeah.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Married to the Mob.
Don't think anybody thought you were saying it was coming out ahead of the whole pack.
No. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Right.
This movie's shot by Jordan Cronenwith, who is a cinematographer who shot Blade Runner.
Yes.
So interesting that the movie looks the way it does. His son, Jeff Cronenwith, also a cinematographer, known for his work with David Fincher on, like, Fight Club and The Social Network and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and stuff. It's edited by Frank P. Keller. His second to last film as editor, who he died in 1977 on Christmas Day. Kind of a cool bit to just ruin Christmas for your whole family forever. Yeah,
cool bit.
Cool bit. Anyway, he is best known for editing fucking Bullet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's some of the some of the guys behind the
That's
camera.
the squad.
That's the squad. So it's sort of interesting to note that the film came out the way it did. But
Well, I want to be clear. You're making it sound like it's like total junk. To me, it's like just a mishmash of parts that don't really fit with each other.
it's not, I would say it's not total junk, but it's a lot closer to The Outfit than it is to Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
It's kind of just an incoherent in a non-productive way
That's
text.
true.
I want to read from just to give folks a sense of the difference between the film and the Schrader script. I want to read from Schrader's script and then play you the opening of the film.
Great, please.
So Schrader's script opens with a few epigraphs. First, it says, Rolling Thunder was the code name for air operations over North Vietnam, 1965 to 1972. And it says, 2 quotes. Pre-credits, film opens with 2 fade-in, fade-out quotes. White letters against a black field. There is no sound. First quote. In the first 2 years after repatriation, 53.4% of the deaths of World War II ex-POWs held in the Orient were attributed to violent causes. Murder, suicide, in the act of crime, or on the highway. This was a violent death rate 4 times the normal expectancy. From the report by the Committee on Veterans Medical Problems, September 1954. And second quote, Our returning prisoners of war are examples of the high moral fiber which will help make this a nation free from crime. Richard M. Nixon, Report on Crime in America, March 14th, 1972. A pause and then fading in against the black field, red letters reading Rolling Thunder.
Not subtle, but pretty good.
Yeah. And he also he calls for a song called Go Hide John by Red Sovine to play, which is about it's like told from the perspective of a guy who's coming back from a POW camp, telling his wife to go hide John, the man who sort of moseyed in and
replaced him in his absence.
Yes, exactly. And so you know, a song of male anger and possessiveness over women and violence as the only recourse to that frustration.
We basically get that in the film, don't we? That same type of ironic, anguished torture of both viewer and people on screen.
San Antonio, it's really good to see you.
I think us laughing at it is fair use, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
when it started, I thought, is this powerful irony? I'll be honest. You know, I didn't have enough of the film to be able to judge what were they doing. And I thought, okay, all right.
I think it could be very powerful irony after those 2 epigraphs.
Yeah.
But we don't get them at all.
Nope.
It's also like a Learjet or something that they're coming in on, not like one of those big wide body transport planes or something. So the whole thing is like very comfortable.
Well, if there's any negative emotion, if there's any friction here, it's in the like a sort of a melancholy mismatch, right? Of maybe POWs who don't quite know what to do and their families who also don't quite know what to do. But that's so far from what I think Schrader's script sets up.
Schrader's script it's got a lot less dialogue. It's a lot more, at least at the beginning, it's a lot more silent looks. I mean, I think the Charles Rain character, who's played by William Devane, the lead, is pretty wordless for a lot of the movie. He's a shell. He's like a ghost who doesn't care about anything.
He's a little bit like a ghost in a shell.
That's fucking crazy to think about.
Okay.
Now, what are you doing? What are you doing with your eyelids? Stop it, Ian! No.
You're right, though. And we haven't really talked about William Devane. We, of course, have mentioned him on this podcast before.
Yeah.
Space Cowboys.
He's the OPSEC or what? That's not what that is. His
name's like Glenn or something. Very
ComSat. He's one of these. His name is 2 different abbreviations put together in at the Mission Control in Space Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
You watched The Grinder, right?
Yeah.
Do we both watch The Grinder?
I watched the first few episodes of The Grinder. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful television show starring the wonderful man Rob Lowe, who will be on this podcast.
False.
But that is a very and also I believe Fred Savage has now been incredibly accused of
seemingly bad guy. Yeah, William Devane is daddy in that.
He plays their dad on that show, and he's very funny.
You've seen him in other stuff, probably, viewer. I mean, he's he becomes, I will say, a pretty steady character actor, but this was his big shot, at least in his mind.
Yeah. Well, and he often will play top brass guys, or he's a guy in a suit who's telling you can't do that, or telling you should do this. He becomes a figure of authority, of like government authority. He's at this point already played both JFK and RFK. He's got the face of a man who's in government service.
I mean, I think he effectively plays against that in this film, but what he plays instead is somebody who is thoughtful and tortured, but it doesn't seemingly affect his ability to show compassion for his wife and stuff, which is...
He's way too in control. The performance, I think, I mean, I haven't read Gould's script, but compared to what from the Schrader script, which I think could have been, at the very least, a very interesting and deeply unpleasant film.
Yeah.
But intentionally unpleasant film. Here he seems a lot more like John Wick than like Travis Bickle.
Not even, well, even less than that. So, I mean, to be clear, you were saying Charles Rain and what's Tommy Lee Jones' character? John Verrute?
Johnny.
Whatever.
Yeah, and in the script, I would say that the Rain character is a lot, in the Schrader script, the Rain character is a lot closer to the performance that Tommy Lee Jones gives.
Yes, which is
where he's hollowed out.
I like Tommy Lee Jones' performance. I mean, he only has about 3 scenes, really, but this was one of Tommy Lee Jones' first roles, and this was William Devane's.
He's also in Space Cowboys.
Yep, true. William Devane's supposed shot at stardom. But anyway, they return from a POW camp. They've been there for like 7 years, and they're welcomed home. And we get what you were talking about with that song, which is an immediate understanding that Charles Rain's wife has been with a local cop named Cliff while he was gone. And I was pleasantly surprised that it was treated with such humanity, where he seems to be kind of understanding about like, well, I get that you thought I was dead. Love is not something that is some sort of like mysterious force unrelated to material conditions, and you fell in love with somebody else, and seems like he took care of my son pretty well. And I actually thought this zag could potentially have been interesting when it was happening. You're right, it was not at all what was in Schrader's script. The problem is they kept a bunch of the other stuff from Schrader's script, and then it just doesn't make any sense at all, basically.
Well, I think in the script he's at least so hollowed out that he doesn't give a shit at all that she's with somebody else.
Yeah.
We get the sense that he is totally understanding. And there's even a scene where she is still like planning to leave him.
Yeah, she's trying to do the right thing.
But she is. There's a scene in the Schrader script where she also asks him if he wants to have sex. Like there's a very 70s style. This is an extreme circumstance in which I fully believed you were dead and moved on with my life. You're not dead, and so we're still technically married, and like, we could have sex if you want, even though I am planning to leave you for another man with whom I presumably have been having sex also. And none of it is treated as like aberrant.
No.
It's just sort of...
That's kind of in the film too. She asked if she should go put on a mini skirt, which I understood as her saying, would you like the night to go that direction? And he says no. And you're right. It's very open about the idea of sort of like what feelings still persist despite the fact that they maybe don't have a place anymore. I mean, to be honest, it's a continuation of what we were seeing in the Yakuza film, where we had a similar circumstance. A cuck, but a cuck where all parties involved are sort of absolved of any guilt.
Sorry, were you reading from your journal? Because we do that later in the show.
Right.
The miniskirt thing reminded me. Sorry, what you're saying is honestly kind of a surprising bit of judgment-free sexuality from Schrader, who seems most comfortable discussing sexuality by damning obviously inappropriate forms of it. Like, that seems like the part that he likes to talk about.
Yes, through examinations of perversion and sexual obsession, we've observed on occasion.
Well, hold on, that's for later in the show. He also mentions in his script, and this doesn't come up in the movie to my deep disappointment, but he mentions that the Air Force gives Rain a dictionary of slang for returning POWs. to catch them up. And this is the miniskirt being part of this sort of like what's happened when I got back. He has a sort of an Austin Powers, Rip Van Winkle type experience. And I've found here from the New York Times in 1973. This is the headline. I guess they had more ink back then. To the returning POWs, this list may be a little far out for you dudes, a little heavy, but it's what we've been into while you were gone. Dig? That's the headline. Semi-official glossary was assembled by the United States Air Force from information supplied by families of prisoners in North Vietnam to acquaint the returning POWs with slang expressions now used in America. We hesitate whether or not to call the language progress, the introduction says. But facts are facts. This is part of the slang being used by your sons and daughters. The main purpose is to get you and your offspring off to somewhat of an equal start. So, weird eugenic language here. So some of the things in here are be down on, to dislike or disapprove of something or someone, usually intensely. Example, he's down on pollution. But it also explains like Afro and acid and Black Panthers.
Yep.
Commune, they explain what a commune is. Dude, any male. Guys in Vietnam know what a fucking dude is.
Well, I think it's a guy who works at a horse ranch.
Yes, exactly. We have gas, it's a. We have gay, homosexual, accepted term by homosexuals. Honky or honky, i.e. as a spelling variant. Ms, they explain what Ms means.
Okay. Wow.
Pull yourself together. Secure, emotionally clear conception of oneself and relationship to others and life in general. Have everything or something clear in one's mind.
I mean, this is interesting as like a double historiographic document, both of what they thought was important and what we now see is like the New York Times' conception of what was important.
Yeah. Zonked. They got zonked in here.
Yeah.
Extremely high on a drug. To zap, to emphasize in an unforgettable manner. I don't think I know that. So, yeah, he's returning to a world where he does not fit. This is, Schrader's basic conception of the character is that he cannot reacclimate to life at all until this violence is visited upon him, at which point he undergoes a personality change and suddenly can hang again. Like he is finally comfortable once he is tortured and his wife and child are murdered, and then his life has meaning and purpose.
Well, and critically, it activates something not just that he had developed in Vietnam, but a trait that was already in him from his childhood. This racial distaste and desire for violent comeuppance.
To be clear, I think Schrader's description of this script in that interview that I read is
imagining pieces that aren't in there.
Yeah, or just, describing maybe details that he left out.
Yeah, I agree.
But held in his own mind. But we do get scenes where, for example, Rain he's like being given a new set of clothes by a clothing store to help him. Like the whole town is pitching in to get him back on his feet. And he sort of looks at himself in the mirror and like rips the shirt off and out from under the jacket.
Yeah.
So that like when he goes back to his house and runs into the gang, he's wearing like a suit with a torn shirt under it. And he's just a lot more repressed. I do want to read a section of the script that is very crazy. Oh, I should say it explicitly mentions like Jane Fonda and the Hanoi Hilton, and there's a whole like extended press conference sequence where Rain is clearly unable to keep himself together while describing his situation. And that's taken out of the...
I want to give you a chance to read what you have here, but what we do get in the film is Rain giving a statement when they arrive at the airfield and saying, either in a bit of dramatic irony or in a bit of knowing irony, he says, I know that from the president on down, all of you were supporting us here, which, of course, is not the case.
Yeah, he's really representing the other men in a way. Like, he just seems like he's able to put on a brave face in a way that the character in the Schrader script is not.
Yeah.
And I think this undermines the film because you then don't get the contrast between pre-assault Rain and post-assault Rain. And you also just, at no point do you ever really get the sense that this guy's been, you can't tell if this guy's been broken or if he's always been like this. I don't know. I just think it's messy. It's incoherent.
I think it's setting up a different but potentially interesting film where he just slowly realizes how much his path has diverged from any other person that he could have contact with and fizzles out, basically. But again, that's not what happened.
Yeah. So as a point of comparison, here is after that scene where his wife asks him if he wants to have sex and he turns her down. It says, time cut to later that night. The room is dark. Charlie, unable to sleep, gets out of bed and begins dressing. Cut to exterior drive-in theater. Rain's big caddy, top up, pulls into an outdoor theater. By the way, Schrader makes a point at every single mention of the Cadillac. He says in parentheses whether the top is up or down, which I appreciate.
Great.
It's coming out of the toaster like that.
Mm-hmm.
Rain's big red caddy, top up, pulls into an outdoor theater. The marquee advertises Deep Throat Adults Only. Cut to, Rain sits behind the wheel watching the film. The light from the screen is reflected on his face. Moans and groans are heard off-screen. He takes another hit from his quart of J&B. Turning to his left, Rain looks into the cars parked nearby. He sees dark forms engaged in various stages of necking and petting. Feeling someone staring at him, he turns and looks to his left. There, 2 cars away, sits a young man hunched in the front seat with a beer can in his hand. The young punk's face is gaunt and drained of color. He wears a green plaid western shirt and army jacket. Those who have read another script of mine titled Taxi Driver will recognize this young man. His name is Travis Bickle. Travis and Rain stare at each other for a moment. 2 fuses slowly burning down. Now here we're going to pretend we dropped in the audio of Sam Jackson saying, I'm putting a team together.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Enter the Schraderverse.
Yep.
But, I mean, it's an obvious sort of thematic connection to draw, but it's fruitful for this discussion where, that is not the impression we get from Rain at all in this film, I think. No,
and even if the characters weren't meant to be identical, I think what we can say is it's supposed to be like a circumstantial difference, right? Where Travis comes, if he was in Vietnam, right? One of the questions about Taxi Driver is whether this, he's really
whether he actually was, or he just bought this jacket.
Exactly. Yeah. But Rain comes back to a situation that should be comforting to him, right? He comes back to the picturesque nuclear family, and he still doesn't find a place for him, which of course is distinct from Bickle, who maybe returned, he was already Bremer mode, went to Vietnam, returned, and found this shitty apartment in Fear City.
Yeah. We also get, from the get-go, there's like Schrader establishes Rain's Texas conservative libertarian politics. Like they explain that the Army or the Air Force is giving him all these years of back pay, which is like $147,000 or something. And they say, what are you going to do with it? And he says, I ain't putting it in no bank, that's for sure. Like that kind of oppositional posturing. He's angry. He's barely able to contain his anger in a way that Devane just is. Devane is just
he's
a much cooler
rational.
Cucumber.
Exactly. He's too cool.
Yeah. And, you mentioned the difference of circumstance. And it's interesting to think about the Vietnam movies by these There But For the Grace of God, like asthmatic dorks who got stuck in, who didn't ship off. I mean, Schrader, I don't think his, and maybe he was too young or his draft number never came up. His brothers did, and he fled the country.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lucas was also too frail to go, but was obsessed with Vietnam. Oliver Stone, of course, I think generally regarded as the first Vietnam veteran to make a Vietnam movie, like a major Vietnam film. But obviously it's weighing on Schrader as, in his letters, as we mentioned, his letters to his brother Leonard, he's like, every once in a while will refer to one of their friends from back home in Michigan who got a draft notice. So like, these are his contemporaries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that I mean, of course, you'd be obsessed with this, right? Because it's like
it's all around
major anxiety playing on everyone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other things that happen. So there's the sequence where Rain is at a ceremony to chainsaw down the billboard that's been put up to remind people that he's being held prisoner. And in the script, it's a hatchet that he uses. I don't know if there's any real distinction to be drawn there.
Yeah.
But there's also, we get introduced to the Linda Forchette character.
We do.
Forche, whatever. Who in the script is described as, I really got the impression of like Candy Clark in The Man Who Fell to Earth, like just a total airhead.
Yeah, that's fair.
He describes her as like half plastic, like she's very Texas sort of dolled up, to invoke Austin Powers once again, basically the costume that Elizabeth Hurley is wearing when they take the tour of Virtucon.
Which is how she comes across in the first couple scenes of the film, I think.
Well, but she's dressed in a much more earthy way. Like she's obviously not wearing makeup. She's a little bit sunburnt. Her hair is down. She's like not wearing a bra.
Mm-hmm.
She looks like a much hipper woman than we get in the script. And she's also played by Linda Haynes, who was born to Swedish parents and raised partially in Caracas. Like you get this is not a Texan. We don't get the sense. And she also just seems like she's got some thoughts in her head, and as the character as written does not have any thoughts in her head, and is like openly like, I'm stupid, I don't know what's going on, like says that pretty explicitly. The character in the script is also like a vet chaser, like just shows up to the airstrip.
Well, again, I don't know that that's not the case in the movie. I mean, we haven't explained what her relationship to Rain is yet, but it's effectively makes her a vet chaser. I mean, she calls herself a groupie later.
Yes, she explains what a groupie is. Groupies are someone who is really zapped.
Right.
Now, do you want to talk about Viva bracelets, or should I?
Hey, man, you talk about it, and then I want to talk about how this idea of POWs was weaponized by the United States government.
Yeah. Let's do it. So, the Viva bracelet, as briefly mentioned in the film, and I had to look up what this was because I've never heard of this. So, Viva is short for Voices in Vital America. Mm-hmm. One of the worst acronyms I've ever heard.
Vital America, insane. Yeah.
Yeah. This was a student organization, ostensibly student organization, although
But this feels about as much like a student organization as like the Free Cuba Committee feels like a student organization.
Yeah, the Fair Play for Cuba Commission. Yeah. Very closely associated with Bob Hope and what's this guy Bob Dornan, who was a Los Angeles or like San Bernardino area politician who he ran for mayor of LA. He was a politician who, so he was like briefly an actor, Bob Dornan, and then claims to have been at the March on Washington in his Air Force uniform, but there's like no indication that he was actually there. He then was like in the 70s, he was a huge advocate for the development of the B-1 bomber.
Very cool.
He was an opposition speaker at the 1977 National Women's Conference. That kind of shit.
Yep. So
just like a real fucking weirdo. And he briefly tried to run against Clinton in 1996. So yeah, their whole bag, to borrow the terminology of the time,
mm-hmm.
was that they wanted to bring attention to the plight of American POWs without getting embroiled in controversy about the war, which is, of course, impossible.
Yeah.
To ignore controversy about the war, to try to stay out of it, is inherently a political move. Like
Correct.
It's an ideological move. And so they made these bracelets out of they were like nickel plated or something.
The supposed leaders of this are two young college student women,
right.
Carol Bates Brown and Kay Hunter.
Yes. And they just conveniently know a guy who makes bracelets, and they conveniently know somebody else who has a bunch of nickel or something. It's
and they print 4 million of them.
5. And raise enough money to produce untold millions of bumper stickers, buttons, brochures, matchbooks, newspaper ads, etc., to draw attention to the missing men.
So this is like a Live Strong that you wear in memory
of a specific guy.
Exactly.
They have one person's name on them with the date that they went missing, and of course the whole MIA thing that comes out of this. And we've talked about this previously on the show with Bo Greitz. There's of course never a great answer on whether some presumed dead men U.S. men in Vietnam were not actually being held in bamboo cages and tortured well into the 2020s. 80s or 90s.
Exactly. I think this is called the living prisoners theory or something.
Yes, exactly. I know we're not talking about the host of the show.
No.
So, yeah, this was a kind of don't forget our boys over there.
Yes.
And this sort of image is deeply potent, and my comrade Ian is going to talk about it now.
Yeah. So I did some rereading of Manufacturing Consent, Chomsky's famous text. If you haven't checked it out, certainly worth a read. I mean, it's foundational reading for a reason. Unfortunately, I think it's become the kind of thing that people just say like, oh, of course, this text that I know what it's all about. And it's Chomsky and Edward S. Herman, I should give credit to as well. But
from Gilmore Girls.
That's right. Yeah. Very good.
He played the grandpa.
He also is in, I think, Reds, playing like Eugene O'Neill or something.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. Anyway, the text, primarily for those who aren't familiar, Chomsky, despite his fame as a sort of like anarcho-communist leftist figure, was, of course...
he is. I'm looking at the back of my Blu-ray of Reds, trying to distract Ian from what he's doing.
As an academic, was, primarily a linguist, and the text of Manufacturing Consent is about this propaganda model of sort of how are Americans in particular brought on board with government projects and sort of like status quo efforts to maintain capitalism in particular, but, sort of like neoliberal model of capitalism. And what I think makes the text great, whether you agree with it or not, is that it is not nearly as conspiratorial as it sounds. It's not saying, in fact, a big part of the argument is that there's not a concerted effort, as in like a top-down controlled model of the media that I think we sometimes get as like, if people are trying to dismiss somebody like Cy Hirsch, they dismiss him as a guy who sees everything as like a coordinated attack on the minds of Americans or something. Whereas I think Chomsky and Herman's argument is much more compelling, at least to me, because what they're saying is this is just sort of a consequence of a bunch of factors that all work together to create basically the same effect. The idea of like advertisers, who are your advertisers? They're private corporations. And so how are they going to influence media? How is the fact that media is controlled by a small number of people going to influence the message that it sends forward?
Right. It's less of a dark cabal and more of the natural consequence of different, distinct, selfish motivations that all sort of thrust toward a similar end, no?
Exactly. And that end is particularly anti-communist and reifying of sort of like U.S. government maintenance. So in the text, they have an entire chapter dedicated to how this propaganda machine worked for the wars in Indochina, in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And among other things that we probably can't get into, they talk very compellingly about the fact that the idea of like South Vietnam is basically an invention of the United States, in the sense that Vietnamese people just saw Vietnam, but this idea of like a distinct cap-loving group that was like totally unrelated to North Vietnam that we had to protect from the scary North Vietnamese is made up.
Right. Well, it's the whole premise that Vietnamese people are only capable of their own self-definition if the answer they come up with is capitalism is
correct,
ludicrous, and unfortunately something that is repeated basically constantly by the U.S. imperial machine.
Of course, that's exactly right. And of course, ignoring how we got involved in places like Laos and Cambodia and did a ton of damage to them when, again, supposedly the only people we're fighting are North Vietnam. So basically anything that doesn't fit this narrative gets excised. But one thing very relevantly that they talk about is the beatification of POWs and how this is used even after the fact. And I'm going to quote here in a second, but he says in narratives that are told, years or decades after the Vietnam War, after the end, they do this work of explaining why we were really there, like why it was worth the money, why it was worth the cost of the incredible war crimes. So they say the myth also became the basis of popular culture accounts in movies such as The Deer Hunter, Uncommon Valor, The Escape, and Missing in Action, in which Rambo-like heroes slaughter evil Vietnamese as they save our betrayed and tormented POWs. These movies turned history on its head. As Vietnam War historian H. Bruce Franklin points out, Americans' vision of war was being transformed. The actual photographs and TV footage of massacred villages, napalmed children, Vietnamese prisoners being tortured and murdered, wounded GIs screaming in agony, and body bags being loaded by the dozen for shipment back home were being replaced by simulated images of American POWs in the savage hands of Asian communists. The powerful cultural myth of abused POWs as the central feature of the Vietnam War not only allowed the war to be extended, it helped justify the U.S. failure to aid its victim in accord with the end of war promises, and it provided the basis for an 18-year economic war against the victim country. It also functioned as a potent agent of militarization and force weakening the Vietnam Syndrome. So this is not, again, he's not saying that the Department of Defense created Rambo or something funded Uncommon Valor. But what he's saying is that this has the same function of propping up a myth that served the U.S. government in convincing people that, oh, that's what the war was about. Now I remember. Now you're recalling this image that never existed.
When the ways that this is indirectly or less conspiratorially furthered is through things like, obviously, the kind of people who can become studio heads are generally going to be capitalists. Obviously, those films may or may not have had government involvement, but they certainly films that are disputing this, the official story of the war, are not going to have government involvement. They're not going to be able to use helicopters or whatever. You've also got the fact that, we've seen this with God's Children Are Not For Sale. What the fuck is it called? Sound of Freedom, where the lunatics who are deeply and passionately supporting these narratives are going to push a lot harder to get people to see them than someone who is against the war generally doesn't have the kind of money to like buy up a bunch of tickets to these things or what have you. So it's like, it's a constellation of interrelated but not necessarily fully agreed upon in a dark room kind of motivations.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I have to say, rereading description of not just the My Lai massacre, but the many, many attendant massacres and sexual assaults and murders of children and destructions of Vietnamese farmland, impossible not to recall Gaza in this moment. And the fact that how easily those images, which it feels like on their face, how would you see an image of a starving child or somebody in a hospital that's bombed out being operated on without anesthesia? And your instinct is to say, this is awful. This is an atrocity. What created this? But I don't know. How can we say otherwise except that there are so many effective operators who leap in to tell you that's not the case. It's more complicated than insane. That. What are you going to do about Iran, right? If we don't back Israel in this moment, or what are you going to do about the Israeli hostages, right? It immediately becomes a question of, you are the simpleton for thinking that this is somehow something that should be morally objected to. And you
can't understand this. You couldn't possibly, you don't have the capacity.
Leave it to the experts.
Yes, the experts who are all funded by the participant in the conflict who has more money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
First of all, the Hanoi Hilton, I do have to say, in 1999, Hilton opened a hotel in Hanoi called the Hilton Hanoi Opera Hotel.
Okay.
Which is insane. Why would you not? Don't you just own another, or just call it brands, the Opera?
Yes,
what is, anyway, it'll reopen in 2025 as the Waldorf Astoria, Hanoi.
There you go.
Anyway, I have a couple things to say about POWs. Thank you for reading that from Brother Gnome. I believe
we thank those gentlemen.
Yeah, he wrote some of that on the Lolita Express, I think. He was on the plane, right? Isn't he on the flight logs?
I think he might be. Yep.
Chomsky. Yeah.
Yep.
People are complicated. I don't know. I don't know.
No,
you can write something. You can write something really effective and also associate with, or
truth.
Even do really bad shit.
Yep.
So the Hanoi Hilton is a term that American POWs came up with for the Hua Lo prison.
Yes.
Where many generally shot down pilots were held by the North Vietnamese as prisoners of war.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to arrive at anything like factual information, like confirmed factual information about this. This is the place where John McCain was held. I like people who don't get captured. Probably the funniest thing a politician's ever said. But this is like the POW camp. Obviously, somebody built this prison, and would you believe it was the French? That this is this was Maison Centrale, which was the major prison of the French colonial government.
Probably treating all the indigenous Vietnamese people really well in that prison, I would imagine.
No, they actually held them, many of them political prisoners, and like tortured them and executed them and stuff. And when it was built, its capacity was around 460 inmates, and by 1954 it held more than 2,000. So people not really in probably humane conditions, even by prison standards. There was also the prison on Kong Sung Island, which is off the south coast of Vietnam, and is referred to sort of as the South Vietnamese Hanoi Hilton, essentially.
Yep.
Would you believe it also built by the French?
I would also believe that.
I mean, whether or not anyone was held in inhumane conditions, I would imagine during times of war, prisoners of war are often held in inhumane conditions. There's sometimes not a surplus of resources.
Sure, these are like improvised bureaucratic organizations.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also have the same like conscripted, angry, traumatized young people running all of these that are also doing the war crimes.
Yeah.
But I think we can say confidently that the fault lies with people in charge of these things, and first and foremost with the movers and shakers of European empire who established these prisons in the first place. The people who are directing young men to fly planes over you're so fucking far away from Texas.
Yes.
I watched some of Hearts and Minds in anticipation, and there's just, they could have ended the movie about 15 minutes in when they are talking to a trucker in the American South somewhere who is saying that he supports the war, but he doesn't know a ton about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask him which side we're fighting for, and he says, "We're fighting for the North, right?"
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean,
yeah.
What the fuck do we need to, if there's no reason for the U.S. to be there.
Yes.
And so the fault of anyone being held as a POW is ultimately with the leadership, the military and executive leadership of the United States for being involved in the conflict in the first place.
I am going to use that dreaded phrase on both sides. The human cost is really something that I think the average person cannot even allow themselves to think about. And I, believe that of a captured Texan pilot or of a prepubescent child in either North or South Vietnam who bore witness to and then became a victim of this conflict. And that is something that in both cases we can multiply by thousands or tens of thousands, right? So, how do you conceive of that and come away with a position that says, well, maybe this was in a realpolitik sense, some type of necessary conflict that we engaged in.
And I think Schrader's maybe not the world's most successful artistic interpretation of this as, showing a sort of sociopath going to Vietnam and coming back and only feeling comfortable doing the kind of sociopathic violence that he was allowed to do and then maybe subjected to in Vietnam. That's the only way he can feel comfortable back home is by perpetrating this same violence and being sort of immersed in it. I think he is at least gesturing toward the fact that these decisions by the people who are in charge of U.S. empire are multiplying this kind of suffering. They're generating and spreading this kind of unimaginable suffering to the underclass of the world, who first and foremost the rural Vietnamese who's these people in Hearts and Minds who are just showing you like, this is where my kitchen was,
right?
And it's like next to the big crater.
But mostly, you're right. In the case of Schrader's film, I'm not sure basically any subjectivity is given to the Vietnamese. If there is an undermining of U.S. government activity, I don't
believe there are any Vietnamese characters on screen, really. But
right, we get some of the torture people for
in this film, but right. I mean in Schrader's script.
It's true, yes. But what we do get is a more classic questioning of the effect that this is having on all the people who are sent there, and then this understanding that when they come back, they will just be human again.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be able to sort of reintegrate.
Right.
I also want to read a little bit. This is from an interview with the anthropologist Nadia Abu El-Haj, who she's a professor at Barnard, and in 2022 was the co-director of the Center of Palestine Studies at Columbia University. I'm not sure what is going on with that center at this time.
Yeah.
She wrote a book called Combat Trauma. She's interviewed about the book by Jacobin in 2022. And she says, within the movement against the Vietnam War, the concept of post-Vietnam syndrome emerged. It was developed by a group of radical psychiatrists and Vietnam veterans who were part of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and the syndrome was simultaneously a psychiatric and political conception. The veterans understood themselves to have been traumatized by what they did, not by having been victimized, but by having committed atrocities on a regular basis. In other words, trauma was born in transgression, and understanding and healing trauma was inseparable from articulating a political critique of the war. And she continues, various things converged in the 1980s to shift the understanding of trauma and to depoliticize it. As part of the rise of the conservative movement, Reagan sought to rewrite the war in Vietnam. One crucial piece to rewrite was that the U.S. did not lose the war on the battlefields, it lost on the home front. The anti-war movement deprived the fighting force of their ability to do the job. Part of that reconstruction is a reconstruction of the treatment of Vietnam veterans upon their return. So it's not just that the war was lost on the battlefield, it was that trauma was produced by a homecoming as well, because of the ways in which the Vietnam veteran was demonized. So you have a political shift that's inseparable from the trauma conversation. She also talks about the sort of evolution of the concept of PTSD and adaptation by psychiatrists studying other things. And obviously PTSD is real and comes from all kinds of,
of course,
places. But I didn't realize that, you know, its origin as something to be studied comes from these radical anti-war psychiatrists. And it starts post-Vietnam syndrome, like that original conception of PTSD is specifically concerned with the trauma felt by people who were ordered or, you know, placed in a position where they were able to commit atrocities rather than witness or suffer atrocities.
Yes.
And I think this film does exactly what she's accusing Reagan and the sort of post-war conservative movement of doing, which is immediately victimizing Rain. Because in the torture scene, in the script, Schrader is very explicit about the fact that Rain had this experience in the prison where he is, in fact, tortured. Like that is definitely what happens in the script, in the prison. But he sort of like prays to God to remove him from this experience, and God just like basically grants him the power of dehumanization or something, of derealization. Exactly. Yeah, the power of dissociating. In the movie, he says they've pulled out whatever it was inside me. It never hurt again after that, and it never will, which is basically what he means. But in this torture sequence, when the guys come in and want money, and also in Schrader's script, it's so much more money. Because in the Flynn movie, we get a lot more of a sense of like, these are just criminals who like doing crime. These are just bad guys.
Explain this, I think, in case people aren't watching Rolling Thunder. Basically, in the process of Rain sort of like tripping through his daily life that he can't reintegrate into successfully, eventually what happens, he's given these silver dollars as sort of like a promotional...
One for every day of his captivity, which it's like $2,500 in the 70s, which... would now be like $15,000 or something.
Right. And again, he gets this, I think, sponsored by like I don't know, an outlet mall or something. Like
a Cadillac dealership or something. Yeah.
Right. Again, which, you know, I think is a beautiful representation of not an explicitly ideological operator, but somebody who plays into this. Anyway, he has these silver dollars, and this gang of mixed Mexican and American creeps come to his house and say, give us this money. They try to torture it out of him, but of course he flashes back to his experience of torture and refuses to give it to them. They put his hand in a garbage disposal and shred it to bits. And then his wife and son show up, and they threaten them, and they immediately reveal where the money is. Rain is sort of still in his shell-shocked mode. Then they execute his wife and son, and this is what you're talking about. Him. Right? Yeah. Yes, and shoot him as well.
In the script, it goes down in very crucially different ways. It's fascinating watching this movie to see how relatively small changes to a script can result in such a
Yes.
ideologically nearly opposed film, I would say.
Yep.
So in the script, Rain is unable to give in. Like his body will not let him. Like he's sort of outside of it, and he's aware that they're trying to get like $150,000 from in like all his back pay in 1977 money. So it's like a lot of money. So at the very least, we can sort of understand economically why someone would go to these lengths as opposed to just Mexican
this
people
weird little
being
gift.
evil. Yeah.
Yep.
So he's unable to do this, and he's just sort of watching this all happen to him. And they bring his wife and child into the room, and they put the gun to his wife's head, and he's like unable to, because of his experiences, he's unable to do anything. They kill the wife, and then the kid gives it away.
Right.
And then they kill the kid anyway. So it's like, it's his experience. It's not just that he is immediately victimized. It's that he's come back unable to even interact with these. He's unable to experience this torture the same way. And Schrader says also of the hand thing. So the interviewer, what was his name? Jackson. Kevin Jackson. Says there's an idea in common between Rolling Thunder and the Yakuza to do with the mutilation of the hand. This also happens in Taxi Driver, although it's someone else's hand. In the Yakuza, a ritual cutting off in Rolling Thunder damaged by garbage disposal unit. And Schrader says that's a common fantasy of all writers because you write with your hands, and the self-destructive impulse in a writer takes that form. It's like a painter fantasizing about blinding himself.
Gotta tell you that this is not maybe as common as you think, but that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. I love just everybody. It's like when someone outs themselves on Twitter and they say like, well, everyone's attracted to their own daughter, but we all just like, we work through it. Like, hold on a second. Everybody.
Yeah, I'm reading Mishima in preparation for the future. He does a similar thing where he says, actually, being gay and being a sadomasochistic guy who envisions your own death is actually pretty much just tied up. They're inextricable from each other.
Yeah, there's no way to be either of those without the other. But his hand gets shoved into the garbage disposal. Apparently, there was a very graphic scene of this that they shot with like a lamb shank or whatever that was cut out of it. But I think, crucially, the changing of the order of things and also making unclear exactly why Rain doesn't tell them where things are is hugely significant to the sort of message of the film.
We get a sort of weak version of this critique, a different critique of masculinity, where one of the thugs says, well, he's too macho. That's why he can't tell them. Right? Basically, his sense of heroism has outshone everything else. Nothing else exists in him except for this sense.
Because he's too macho.
Right.
If you want to name your cock macho, that's okay by me.
Yeah.
And so then this in the script is a turning point at which, through which Rain's life gains purpose and meaning again, and he's able to comprehend the world around him now that he's had violence perpetrated against him.
We did also skip the scene that explains why I was asking about Shibari. So do you want to very quickly explain why I was mentioning this?
The Cliff character is also a lot bigger in the movie than he is in the...
That's right, yeah.
So they're trying to have kind of a man-to-man, and it is more successful than the Wizard and Travis Bickle scene that we love so much in Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
And so it is thus artistically a lot less successful. But Cliff says, I want to clear the air. What kind of a man would I be if I didn't have this, if I didn't talk to you about how I've been balling your wife and your son likes me better than you. When the Rain tells him, like, don't call my kid Runt anymore. That's so small potatoes. This guy had his fucking dick and balls hooked up to a car battery or whatever. Like, he doesn't give a shit about that.
But again, that's what undermines it by making him seem like too reasonable of a man and too focused on emotion. But yes, they get this exchange where Cliff is trying to be reasonable himself.
And Cliff keeps saying, like, I don't want to know what happened over there. I don't want to know. And
with a smile on his face that indicates he does, in fact, want to know.
And Rain is like, you want to hear about it? He goes, no. He's like, come on, of course you do. And he starts sort of explaining this daily torture that he experienced where his hands were tied behind him and has Cliff walk through it and like do it to him.
And this is the first scene in the film where Rain is like activated emotionally, where he's expressing any type of...
he says more words here.
Yeah.
And so he has Cliff do this to him, and he has sort of an orgiastic
He does, demanding more and more.
Experience of this, and he explains basically the only way to get through the torture was to love it, to learn to love it. And so we get a sense that he's been Schrader-style perverted, and can now only sort of experience pleasure through... He's become a Cenobite, basically.
Yep.
But this is not really developed any further in the film. I mean, we've been talking for too long about this movie, I think. I don't think it deserves this much episode. So let's... Sure. I mean, and honestly, there's not a whole lot more that happens except just a long, drawn-out pursuit where Rain gets out of the hospital. He's got a hook for a hand now that he sharpens.
Yep.
And he drags Linda into helping him follow these boys across the Texas-Mexico border. It should be pointed out that in Schrader's script they are more Mexican than they are in the film. The film whitens them up, much like Sport and Company and Taxi Driver.
Yeah, I know the audience might have expected me to engage in this discussion of anti-Mexican racism, but it doesn't really make its way into the film, despite how much time they're in Mexico. In fact, I warned my partner that this film was going to be grisly and pretty racist, and it wasn't really either of those things. It's not explicitly racist in the way that it sounds like Schrader wanted it to be.
Yep. Again, because I think they make Rain too reasonable, too identifiable, too whole. Mm-hmm. But he is driving all over trying to find these guys, dragging Linda into it. He puts his hook through some people's hands and nuts and stuff. Cliff also does a bit of pursuit himself. I think this is... I don't remember this from the script at all. Ian, you very wisely drew the connection to No Country for Old Men, where there's kind of a, oh no, is he going to get caught before he can do his thing subplot that then is immediately, or like sort of surprisingly cut short when the cop is just out of his depth. Or at least
I expected this to be this sort of clash of moralities, right? This guy who still lives in the cop fantasy of being a good guy versus Rain, exactly, who understands the sickness. But instead, Cliff just ends up being shot, like you said.
Yeah. Linda is at once drawn to and repulsed by Rain's taciturn ultra-violence. There's a scene where he sort of pulls the e-brake and flips the car around when he's upset with her, which recalled the story that I retold from Margot Kidder about... Paul Schrader demanding that she kiss him and then terrifying her in a car until she did. The sort of sexual weirdness is not nearly as pronounced in the final film as in the book. There's kind of displaced erotic energy that he doesn't really have any interest in sex anymore, just violence. He finally goes and picks up Johnny, the character played by Tommy Lee Jones, who, as I mentioned, is...
one of the better scenes in the film to me, where
the juice. Yeah.
It's fairly obvious, but they're sitting at a dinner table with a bunch of wives and fathers talking past them about TV and things that they will never
real stuff and
be
like
able to engage in.
Buying cars from Japan or whatever.
Right.
And this is what the Schrader script feels like. Like I think this scene is what the whole movie might have been.
And in Tommy Lee Jones, we have this young guy that Rain was trying to coach to sort of like be able to actually get back into society. He says like, yeah, just take a job, stay in the military, get your pension, live your life. And in this moment, he says to Tommy Lee Jones' character, I need to ask you a favor. And Tommy Lee Jones, again, it's like it's like turning on the generator or whatever, basically.
Yeah. He's like, I'll get my stuff. Like it's, but I think what is even more painful in the Schrader script is that the characters are kind of flipped, where Johnny is assimilating decently well. He's getting back to civilian life without too much trouble. And then when this hollowed out man shows up and says, I need you to help me with my revenge plot, he drops everything and goes with, like, he is just as ready.
Right.
Which is haunting in its own way. And then in the film, they go to a brothel where they find the guys, Big Ed and Maleo and all the rest. Let's do a Big Ed corner. So Big Ed is played by James Best. credited as the Texan. But James Best is, of course, best known as playing Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane on The Dukes of Hazzard.
Correct. Yep.
He was in every television show. He was on Rawhide several times with Clint Eastwood. He was also in the Universal like talent program thing that Clint Eastwood was in, but a few years prior, I believe. He's in a million westerns and things. He also, now I found this very interesting. It says on his Wikipedia page, he Best enjoyed a wide range of hobbies and interests.
Oh, wow.
Must have been nice. He was a drama teacher for a very long time. He ran an acting school for like decades and taught people, including Glenn Campbell, famous actor, Regis Philbin, famous actor, and Quentin Tarantino, our own Quentin Tarantino, learned acting from this man.
Yeah.
He wrote a memoir called Best in Hollywood, The Good, the Bad, and the Beautiful. So sort of combining two film titles. Mm-hmm. Also, he was the cousin of the Everly Brothers. So just an interesting guy. And he put ice cubes under his cowboy hat to make it look like he was always sweating in the film.
It's effective. That part I liked.
It is. But they go to this brothel and they kill the men, and nude women are mostly like running away. And then they say, you know, they put their arms around, they're both wounded, but they put their arms around each other and say, let's go home.
And then...
And this plays again. And in contrast this with the end of the Schrader, Ian is laughing, with the end of the Schrader script where...
He kills a bunch of young female Mexican sex workers.
And they just kill everyone there. Right. Rain is killed. He dies. And then the film, Schrader's film ends with the camera slowly pans up the stairs from Charlie's dead body to Johnny still standing at the top of the stairs. He stands bareback and bare feet, his belt hanging loose. Blood covers his right breast and left forearm. Contorted bodies lie on the floor behind him. There is a .45 in his hand. He is screaming at the top of his lungs. His gun is empty, but Johnny cannot stop firing it. His finger manically pulls the trigger. Click, 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 click. The image freeze frame. Sound abruptly halts. Johnny is caught mid-trigger pull, his mouth frozen open in a never-ending scream. Keyed up, ready to go, a force in motion, unable to stop. Pure energy. The freeze frame holds as we hear only the sound of rolling thunder. The end. Yeah.
Wow, terrific. I did not make it that far in the script, and an unending scream, a never-ending scream is...
so it just ends on a freeze frame of this guy screaming and pulling a trigger on an empty gun. So it's, you know...
And having committed another Vietnam-style massacre of a mix of maybe combatants and civilians and... Yeah.
And exacting revenge for something that didn't even happen to him. I think it's crucial that the other guy is still alive.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. This movie's not... To name your production company or your distribution company that you concoct specifically because Harvey Weinstein won't be convinced to import Chungking Express to the United States under Miramax.
Yep.
To name that Rolling Thunder is very bizarre. Ian's name on the video call here is Acuna Boy. Of course, a reference to Jason Weeman Acuna. Just kidding.
Of course. Yeah.
Chronic Tacos, I believe the name of his...
I believe you're right. It has hot sauce as well. No, it's a reference to some of the bad guys in the film.
The bad guys are referred to as Acuna Boys, but like in Death Proof, Tarantino has made up a fake Mexican restaurant name, or Mexican restaurant called the Acuna Boys.
Yes.
Like Acuna Boys Tacos or whatever. Just to... First of all, it reminds me a little bit of... So when I was a kid, my sister was really into cars, and her favorite car was probably, I think it was like a Porsche, like a bathtub Porsche, like the kind of car that is a kid's favorite car.
I got you.
But makes sense that might be one of your favorite, that or a Corvette or whatever, like a cool car.
Yep.
And I a neurotypical man, as far as anyone knows, was like, oh, I should have a favorite car too. And I picked one fully at random. I picked the Infiniti QX4 like SUV. It's just a box.
Yep.
And I just said, well, this is my favorite car. I couldn't tell you anything about it. It's not like I even looked up like the kind of engine it had and then convinced myself that's the best engine to have.
Yeah.
It just looked like nothing. It was just like a fancy, like an upscale version of like a Chevy Suburban or something.
I want to be clear. I think it's a rite of toxic masculine passage to pick a car when you don't really know anything about cars and you feel like you just have to have a favorite car.
And I'm full on 6 or 7.
Yeah. The funny part is that you picked a car, like you're saying, that even a child could recognize as not being a cool car.
I was like doing ChatGPT style behavior. And then I remember my dad took us to the LA Auto Show and they had the next year's QX4 and I went up to it and I'm like pretending that I like this. I'm like, oh yeah, this is
touching
me.
The headlights and stuff. Yeah. Like,
no, I remember it was a silver car, a silver QX4 with tan leather interior, which is just like the most non-aesthetic.
Right.
Like the most just there is no content here. There's nothing to be found here.
Yeah.
So anyway, that is a little bit like, to me, what Tarantino latching onto this film feels like. It's like, why this one?
Yeah, this is also why I think I heard about Rolling Thunder first from Tarantino.
Because it's what he called his production company. Yeah,
and I think I
Yeah.
imagined that it was going to be like grindhouse stuff. And I was kind of, not say that I'm excited necessarily always to watch that stuff, but it can be a little bit more challenging just as like a thematic and aesthetic experience.
When you chase down a Tarantino reference, you can sometimes end up with The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, one of the great films. Or sometimes you end up with Rolling Thunder, one of the films.
Yeah, again, I want to emphasize, I don't think this is unwatchable. We talked about the people behind it. I think it's very visually, not going to say appealing, just visually like more than functional. I don't know. It's somewhere in the like pretty good category.
Yeah, I mean, my famous podcast girlfriend who didn't read the script because she's normal, having watched the movie, said this is just so sad. It's a deeply sad movie, and it is like engaging with the just the events as presented on screen. They're horribly sad, but the fact that they live at the end and they say let's go home, as if somehow we're to imagine that they can go home now. And San Antone, it's really good to see you. I think it's also, there's something in the fact that Schrader's script is set in Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, Texas. And they change it to just St. Anthony, Texas. I don't know what St. Anthony's deal was, but anyway, that's kind of all I have to say about Rolling Thunder.
That's pretty much all I got to say about Rolling Thunder as well. I don't think there's much else.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. This is, front runner for the top film of the Schrader oeuvre. I think it definitely goes Rolling Thunder, Obsession, the Yakuza Taxi Driver. I think
it definitely goes that, not the reverse. Yeah,
a big joke. So we thank you for hanging out with us here. Anything you want to say before we jump off the? I
love you all. Thank you so much.
I would like to say I'm sorry for all the pain that I've caused.
Yep.
Hey, if I'm going to jump off something, that's sort of the first thing that's the first thing that's got to come out. Did you see that Boeing definitely assassinated a whistleblower?
I did see that. Yes. Yeah. I saw that probably a man with a guilty conscience committed suicide unrelated to his ongoing
You're right.
testimony.
That's what I meant to say. That's what I meant to say. And any lawyers listening to this, if I said anything legally actionable, I'm on a large amount of medication, as I said earlier in the show.
Yeah, I like that the Boeing CEO or whoever it was saying, I too am feeling the human emotion of sadness about this event, of which I have no knowledge, malice aforethought, nothing related to really anything that happened. I
scarcely have the appetite for my nutrient paste after hearing this.
Yeah, I did want to shout out, you made me aware of Street Scenes. Wonderful. Yeah.
It's a documentary made by a young Martin Scorsese about sort of war activism in New York City around the
Yeah, shot, in the midst of some protests, and just has an impressive, between him and Harvey Keitel and a bunch of Wall Street guys that they confront, and Bobby-style policemen. Very tragic to me to see this representative to them of like the extremes of jackboot fascism when compared to today's militarized RoboCops. This guy looks like not innocent, but man, do they not know what's like coming for the future. Yeah. Yep.
By the way, jackboot fascism will be on our episode next week where we cover Blue Collar. Very excited for that film.
Me too.
Paul Schrader's directorial debut. Real quick, we got to do our our sexual obsession check-in. This is, of course, where we put to the test Paul Schrader's recent declaration that he is working on a new film, his first, about sexual obsession. Here's that clip.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's what I'm doing now.
Sounds about as good as you talking, I would say, right now.
Yeah, man. I don't know.
Leave that cough in. He's a sick old man.
Crowdfund like a CPAP? Yep.
Hey.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, he does sound like he has CPAP, yeah. Anyway, do you think that... So here on the show, we've made it our mission to determine if Paul Schrader has in fact ever written a film that is not about sexual obsession.
Uh-huh.
And so I would say this one counts as sexual obsession because he is sexually obsessed with violence and pain. I would say that he has...
rope torture. It is the least of the four so far.
Yeah. It is the most... Well, I was about to say it's the biggest stretch, but then that's
the kind of stuff that Rain likes, yeah.
His sex thing he does now. So I think this too fails the test. We'll skip that tulip thing because I want to stop talking about the movie now, if that's okay with you.
I think we did it.
Yeah, great work to both of us. Remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. It helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, emboss it on a nickel bracelet and wear it for the rest of your life. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pod Casty For Me. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a two-person Clint Eastwood podcast, you can email us at podcastyforme@gmail.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. See you next week for Blue Collar. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.